This is the Upstarts versus Old Guard session. And we have a mixture today of Upstarts and the Old Guard, perhaps masquerading as an Upstart. We'll see in just a moment. But please join me in welcoming our panel. The order of proceedings, we'll each kick off with a little opening statement and then we'll open it up to discussion amongst us. We'll talk about some of the challenges, the hurdles, the obstacles that Upstarts are facing as they're launching new media ventures. And we'll think about the trajectories that each are taking, the ways in which they're solving the problems that they're facing. In fact, we might find between us that we can help solve problems that each other is encountering. And then, of course, we want to gauge your views and open it up to the floor and get you engaged in the conversation as well. So, Phoebe, let me start with you. Phoebe Montague is, she founded the fashion and style blog Lady Melbourne in 2007. The blog has grown to include a social media reach of over 50,000 unique likes, fans and followers across platforms like Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Phoebe, tell us about this venture.
I'm the founding editor of Lady Melbourne. I started it in 2007 when blogging was virtually non-existent, and we were talking backstage about how I made it a success, and I was lucky because I just didn't have any competition. That's all changed almost 8 years later. Now I work in a marketplace that is flooded with competition, so it's almost harder now than ever to keep what I do alive. I had run my own fashion label for about 7 years, and I'd lived in London and Sydney. And I came back to Melbourne and found that I didn't see the way I saw Melbourne represented in mainstream media. If you wanted to read about fashion and culture and lifestyle in Melbourne, we had things like Good Weekend, but that was very short snippets, or you turned to most of the major publications which came out of Sydney. And that wasn't satisfying to me. So a girlfriend of mine said, "Why don't you start a blog?" And I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Little did I know it would become my job. She sent me a few links to a few women that were self-publishing, one out of Oslo and one in America. And I was so switched on by the idea that you could do this from your lounge room. I went home and I started that night. And that was February 2007. Over the years, it's taken me all over the world. I travel now about 4 times a year with it. I cover culture. Mainly I cover fashion, but culture, art, and that kind of thing, illustration, events that are happening in Melbourne. And I say that what I do is about Melbourne, but with an eye on the world, just so that while what I do is hyper-local, I'm not excluding anybody from that remit. I now work with The Guardian, RMIT and the CAE, taking courses in digital strategy, social media, blogging, writing for the web. So there's a combination now of still very much editing the fashion blog, but also moving into the realm of education because I'm so passionate about it. When I began, it just didn't exist. So anything like this that you guys are attending today, I think is marvellous.
Thank you very much, Phoebe, and of course we'll explore some of the ideas that you've raised there in just a moment. Tim Hanlon next. Tim Hanlon wanted to be a video game developer until he saw the content management system that was powering Gizmag. After co-writing its replacement in 2003, which intrigues me, Tim, I want to know more about that. He went on to wherever he had in the company before accepting the position of managing director in 2010. So tell us briefly a little bit about Gizmag.
Okay, so my dad was a media man, did magazines since he left university, and I remember him very vividly coming in and telling me about this idea that he had for a new publication called Gizmag. He'd just left Hitwise, and I think a year later it was Noel McKeegan came on board, who's still our managing editor. And we were A6 format magazine, which you probably wouldn't have seen. It was distributed at strategic places where sort of high net worth males would congregate, motorcycle dealerships, high-end audio dealers, stuff like that, with a companion website. And back then that was actually, the people hadn't really embraced the internet, or publishers hadn't really embraced the internet at that stage. So that was kind of new and exciting. And it very quickly got to the stage where, well, we couldn't afford to print the magazine anymore. And by that stage, our web traffic was exploding and most of it wasn't from Australia. So we had a .com.au address at that stage and then decided, well, we need to rebrand and go global. So retrospectively, I think, we're still not really that happy with the name Gizmag, but the actual global focus of the publication was probably the best idea we ever had. Traffic's been growing consistently ever since, despite not that much more content going onto it. So it's nice to sort of prove that there is still an audience that respects quality in journalism. So in 2011, we were having problems again scaling with writers and built a pretty unique system from what I can tell, which is a revenue share system with writers. So we've got some of our guys are earning more than I am. So that's obviously working pretty well for him. Yeah, I came so prepared to talk about things that weren't Gizmag that was a bit awkward, but...
Why don't you like the name Gizmag?
Giz just kind of cheapens it a little bit. We've kind of painted ourselves into a little bit of a corner regarding technology, I think, and we're not... Technology and innovation are such different things, and if you boil down our broad categories and what we look for in a product before we write about it, it's innovation in any field, not tech or not gadgets, and I think that's kind of what Giz implies, so yeah.
Thank you, Tim. Paul Chadwick next. Paul is a journalist and lawyer, and he's the Australian on the board of Guardian Australia. He was the ABC's Director of Editorial Policies between 2007 and 12 and was Victoria's first Privacy Commissioner between 2001 and 2006, and before that, of course, a journalist at The Age. So you're an old guard in the midst of some upstarts, but I want you to talk today, if you can, about something you want to start, which is really intriguing.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, I'm here not to talk about anything to do with The Guardian, but at the invitation of our hosts to talk about an idea that I've been working on for quite some time. In this transitional era from analogue to digital, many of the really marvellous developments in media, we've heard about two already, can come from an individual sitting at his or her screen and creating code or text or sounds or images and then finding an audience, creating a community. And what I'm trying to do needs both more and less than that. It needs more because it will depend on institutional cooperation, not just individual verve. And it needs less because it's already got a community and it's already got an organising principle. And I'll just briefly explain what I mean. The idea is grounded in both journalism and law. It's a hybrid. And I'm a hybrid. I've had a life now, 4 decades nearly, in a career that moves between law and journalism. And a lot of my early work was about freedom of information law and how that would improve scrutiny of government. And then I ran a non-profit for 8 years, the Communications Law Centre in Victoria, which was dealing with law and policy as it affected speech and the free flow of information. I had a period of legal practice and a term in statutory office, which gives you really a very interesting perspective on law as it's formulated and law as it's applied, something you can't get from journalism only. And then I had that remarkable 6 years at the ABC recently, during which I was watching a great public institution adapting itself to the convergence of its platforms and to the fragmentation of its audiences. And it is doing that adaptation. And now here I am working with The Guardian, who are a really fine practitioner of open journalism for the digital era. Now, reflecting on all of those experiences have brought me here because of the invitation I've been given. The organising principle I referred to is the principle of open justice. Basically, the principle that says justice needs to be seen to be done, and the principle that says the rule of law and not of men has a better chance if we can see the law as it's made and as it's being administered. A very concise summary of a whole bag of both theory and learned writings and legal decisions. We don't need to go into the details here. The point I want to make in raising it is that when you really think about what made open justice practical, what really delivers it routinely, it's the practice of journalism and the way the media interacted with especially the courts over about 2.5 centuries. But in that transitional era we're talking about, that time we're in now, some of that's falling away. And it's a worrying thing if you care about that principle of open justice and the way it interconnects with rule of law in a democratic society. The traditional institutional media are employing fewer journalists to do that sort of work. They're spending less time and resources on legal matters. What I would like to do is contribute during this transitional period, because of my hybrid background, to the beginnings of something which will help to fill the gap. I'm trying to be not revolutionary, but incremental. I have a suggestion, not a dream. I call this idea law media, just because it's a convenient working word. And the basic idea would be to create a digital information service about the operation of the law. Very briefly, it would have 3 content categories, broadly speaking. The first would be to aggregate what already exists. There's lots of really useful work about the law that's done by academics and community legal centres and civil service or civil society organisations, the courts themselves, the law reform commissions, etc. But sometimes that's hard to find, and one of the great skills of journalism is to source things, to edit them and to present them in digestible ways. Second type of content would be to generate some that fills that gap I was describing. As the traditional media withdraw under cost pressure from the coverage of the law and law reform issues, you would hope that by gathering together either crowd-based repertorial skill from, for example, the universities, or paying for it, you would be able to generate coverage that fills some of that gap. And lastly, and the most difficult part of the task, is to try to encourage, then host and collate the proceedings of the courts and tribunals and inquiries in one cyber location. To bring together the things you're already seeing them doing, the 2 Royal Commissions, the recent, the one into trade unions and the one into responses to sexual abuse, are streaming their proceedings. Sometimes the federal court will permit the media in, for example, as they did over the Essendon litigation recently. These things are happening. They're happening on a more formal basis in some other jurisdictions around the world. But the great and exciting thing is the way that technology facilitates it, reduces the cost barriers. As scarcity disappears as an organising principle for broadcasting, and internet protocol TV develops, as broadband spreads out, there's much more possibility of these specialised information offerings. Lastly, I've been strongly advised that the Australian market is not strong enough, not big enough, for this to be a commercial proposition. So I believe that in the early stages at least, it'll be founded on philanthropic funding. And I'm at the moment engaged in trying to draw together the institutional cooperation, the resources and the personnel to make this idea real. I want to thank the organisers for giving me the opportunity to speak about it here and you for your attention. And maybe at a future New News conference I can come back and tell you how I went.
So you heard it first here, Law Media. I think you can come up with a more imaginative name than Law Media. I think have a chat to Tim. Gizmag might give you something to aim at. Now, so here we've got law and justice, innovation and gadgets, fashion and style. We can link all those, that's easy. Let's talk about barriers to entry. The thing about all of your projects is that they involve the making of media outside the mainstream. You said in 2007 you went home and started blogging. You took a magazine and made it international. Is it right to say that the barriers to entry are low, or are they actually getting a little bit higher?
All right, I'll take that one. You can get a domain for $3. You can get a WordPress host set up for $2. You know, this is the costs are as close to zero as they're going to get now. You can plug into AdSense and all that sort of stuff, but actually taking that first step, that getting that first employee, understanding the changing advertising landscape, or like, and it goes on. How do I keep my site up? I just got a spike of traffic from social media and my site went down. All those problems are so difficult to solve if you don't know the right people. So harder than ever.
Harder than ever. What do you say, Phoebe?
I agree and I don't agree. Did you hear that? He said, that's okay. He's really gorgeous. He's absolutely right. It's so cheap in monetary terms. You can, well, it actually doesn't cost you anything you know, if you want to pay, you can buy a beautiful WordPress theme and, you know, get unlimited hosting, and it might cost you up to $100 to get started. What a lot of people don't realise is the time that it takes, because you are then become the publisher, the editor, the sales manager, the advertising executive, you know, all of those things rolled into one, and that takes a lot of time. So when I'm talking about blogging or talking to people that want to start, the barrier to entry is very low. It's sustaining it that is what really seems to snag people, and you have to be a problem solver. So like Tim said, if you know, you need to either know the right people. When I began, I didn't know the right people. Google was my business manager, and if I couldn't work it out myself, because what I was doing was very new, these kind of conferences just didn't exist, I would say to myself, look, it's the internet, it's a computer, it's software, I can't break it. Surely there's an answer. I'm not the first person in the world to have done it. And I would just work through searching for an answer online. These days, chances are if you've got a problem with your WordPress blog, someone else has had that problem, made a YouTube video and uploaded it. It's had 40,000 views. The way you can problem solve in 2014 is so much easier than what it used to be, than when maybe Tim and I started. So you still need to know the right people. You know, I had to get an accountant. That was something totally foreign to me. But you also just have to have the ability to say, I'm going to take this on and I'm going to solve these problems myself.
So Paul, what are your initial barriers to overcome in your venture?
Well, I'll try not to repeat the observations that have been made. All I'd say in brief is clearly resources are everybody's issue, and I think, subject to Tim's view, that the technology is actually easier. So, for example, one of the early resistances to the idea of televising court or any legal proceeding was that the cameras were big, intrusive, distracting and noisy. And now the cameras are tiny and silent and capacious and often already embedded in the courtroom for security and transcript and other purposes.
They're recording you now.
So there's lots of technological advantages. The main issue I think that I'm going to be dealing with and am dealing with is a sense of reserve by the law as a culture. It's to do this you need to bring together a culture that's not used to this sort of idea, this sort of expansiveness, as it were, or a cooperation with the technology, with all of those things, and yet understands and has deeply in it this notion of open justice. And that's interesting. A small story, a short parable about some of the obligations. I went to see Steve Brill in New York, the guy who developed what's now known as Court TV. And I asked him, what obstacles did you face in about 1980 when you were doing what you were doing? And what do you think I'll face now, trying to do this in the way I'm trying to do it, given the technological environments in which we were both operating, you in 1980 and me now? And he didn't think for very long. He just immediately said, you have to persuade and assure the judicial culture that this is consistent with the proper administration of the law. And his story was that he went to see Justice Rehnquist, who was then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the US. And he said he persuaded Justice Rehnquist that he should introduce cameras into the Supreme Court of the US. And I said, well, it's great, Steve, but I've never seen anything from the workings of the US Supreme Court. I've seen the District Court, I've seen other courts. What went wrong? And he said, Rehnquist got really keen, took me into his main courtroom, pointed to a small little dark dome on the ceiling and said, they're the new cameras. This is 1980. They're the new security cameras. We could adapt them. There's no technological problem. We've got it's wired for sound. This could be great. I said, what happened? And he said he couldn't persuade the other 8 members of the Brethren. He couldn't persuade the rest of the bench that they should do that. Now, this is 1980. Things are different now. Experiments are going on. The UK Supreme Court, successor to the House of Lords, has a YouTube channel. Things are changing. So, and they're changing here in Australia too. 2 Chief Justices of Supreme Courts in this country that I'm aware of have given public talks about the need for the courts to address this change that's happening in media, the fragmentation of audiences, etc.
Now, this is a fundamental difference between your venture and the others, because there isn't so much an imperative to stop it. There just really isn't an imperative to make it happen. You know, it'll happen because you push it rather than them wanting it to happen. Whereas both you, Phoebe, and Tim, you're dealing with products that people want to get out to market. So in a sense, the people behind those products are more than happy to put them in your orbit in the hope that you'll talk about them, which will increase traffic going to them and get sales. Is that right or not?
I think it's true, but also, you know, when I began, you've got to cast your mind back 7.5 short years. The social media landscape and the marketplace just did not exist as it does today. So there was no Pinterest, there was no Instagram, there were no Facebook pages, there was certainly no Facebook marketing. YouTube had just started. Facebook existed as a place where you were prescribed by Facebook what you would put up. Do you guys remember when you'd say, I'm feeling today, or today I'm feeling, and you would put in whatever feeling you were. Now you can, you know, put in just about whatever you like. When I would tell people that I have a blog or I'm a blogger in the beginning, most people had no idea what that is. They'd say, is that like MySpace? What is that? While I've got formal journalism qualifications, it was very hard to be taken seriously by my peers, but I didn't let that stop me. And I felt like if the people around me and the industry around me wasn't changing, that didn't mean that I should stop what I was doing. So while now it's very easy to sit here and say, oh, look at all these followers I've got and tweet me and let's have this conversation, it wasn't always like that. But that wasn't going to, just the fact that people either didn't know about it, didn't care, or didn't take you seriously, and that was a big thing in the beginning, very resistant to change, mainstream media. I mean, the Herald Sun still won't interview me because they see me as competition. So I won't, that, you know, we don't have anything. I know the journalists, I've got good friends that work there.
You should take that as a compliment.
But if we're at an event, or if I'm working with a brand, or I'm working with a milliner and they'd like a comment, they won't take that. I mean, that resistance is still there, and I've been doing this almost 8 years, but you can't stop.
So, Tim, is this true for you, that people want to put products in front of you, want to cooperate with you, or is it difficult dealing with people?
You would think so, wouldn't you? You'd think we wouldn't have much trouble getting a review unit of a new product out of companies that I'm not going to name here.
They don't deserve it.
Well, we actually have a model with a certain mobile phone manufacturer where we go and buy it, write the review, and then sell the phone on eBay afterwards, because that's how they want to do things.
Because they won't give you the phone.
Yeah.
I know a lot of fashion bloggers that do that. they'll go to David Jones or Myer and they'll buy they'll spend $500 to $1,000 on all the international clothes and shoot them and then return them and get their money back, and they've had access. If they can't actually get access to the clothes through PRs, they'll do that. But I work in a really, fashion's just, they throw product at you.
So, but this isn't the norm then? Generally people will give you a product that you want to review?
It really depends on what vertical. Motorcycles we have no problem with. Certain other
Presumably
ones...
you give the motorbike back to you?
Our guy has had to buy a new rear tyre for one before, but allegedly, sorry. And yeah, other ones, a lot of consumer electronics companies or their PR people more likely are actually, if you want to do a comparison review, it's almost impossible to coordinate getting things at the same time. So yeah, it's not easy, not as easy as you'd think. And I couldn't imagine what it would be like for, an upstart now trying to convince someone to give them something.
Is that because there's now so much competition out there? There are so many others trying to emulate your success that in fact it's become a crowded market?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
How crowded is it?
I have no idea how many tech blogs there are out there, but it's an interesting thought actually, because so many people want to do it themselves, but there's not a lot of collaboration going on. There's not a lot of, if all those guys got together and put their writers and didn't just cover the same stuff on all their little sites, they'd probably have something really serious going. So, yeah.
And in your area, in your domain, is there lots of competition now?
Oh, everyone's a fashion blogger. Yeah, I've actually started calling myself an editor. No, but you could be.
I doubt it somehow.
And, and yeah, I used to go to media calls, or I'd go to events and I would be the only blogger and everyone else would be a journalist. And now I go to events exclusively for bloggers or with bloggers only, all those kinds of things. I think when I began, there were maybe 5 people in Australia that had fashion blogs that were known, and now there would be at least 150 of us in Melbourne alone, if not more. It's an incredibly crowded and competitive marketplace.
So you guys, both of you, with your gazillion, unique likes and followers and so on, have got to that really, really nice position because you got out there first. Is that part of the secret of your success?
I worked really hard.
I'm not trying to take that away from you. I accept that.
Yeah.
But if you work just as hard now from a base where there's lots of competitors, could you get to be where you are now? Yeah,
I think I don't want to get all Anthony Robbins on you, but if you work really hard at something, and you're passionate about it, you can make something work. I know girls that have started and only been around a year or two, but they have just hustled and worked their contacts and got it themselves in front of the right PRs, and they just front up. I mean, I would never have done that. I did things much more the old school way. I waited to be invited to things. I waited until somebody would give me a product and to review. I did things totally differently. Those rules are just gone. So, but they are working. It's like, the old duck underwater. They're working really, really hard. That's the thing, goes back to what I said earlier. People just don't realise the amount of time that goes into it. Before I started to make an income from this, it was unpaid for a couple of years. The content still had to be there every day. It had to be fresh. It had to be new. I had to be going out and finding the stories, but there was nothing behind it. So you've got to weigh up, what's your dream, what's your blog or your business worth?
Paul, do you find this daunting, a bit depressing, a bit overwhelming, or do you find it encouraging and inspiring to hear about how hard it is to get started?
Oh, I find this inspiring and encouraging. What Tim and Phoebe are talking about, and many, many other stories. That's why I opened my comments by saying there is so much good that's been done in this transition to the digital era by people with verve in front of their screens. And I was trying to make the point that to achieve something like I have in mind, I will need to ensure not just resources but institutional cooperation. It's a transitional thing. What I'm attempting to do is not rivalrous with existing media or anything like that. If it works, it will draw them in and have the wonderful things that the digital technologies have given us, like the hyperlink, the power of the hyperlink working. And there are earlier versions of this. In the 1990s, that wonderful service called Ostly was created. Lawyers will know it.
It's still one of the best websites in the country, I think, Ostly.
University of New South Wales, a terrific man there called Graham Greenleaf, an academic interested in computers, gets the funding, works with others. It's now a joint effort of the University of New South Wales and UTS in Sydney, I think. And they got the judgments of courts and digitised them and made them searchable. And now it's a standard part of the architecture of Australian law and legal practice. But at the time, it was just a terrific effort to imagine what digital technologies could give us to revivify great things which are very important in a democratic society, like in this case, the giving of reasons and the availability of law. Law's meaningful, and the rule of law operates to the extent people can find out what the law is. And that was one of the great leaps forward. It's still going.
And it's still
I see
going.
this as evolutionary.
It's still going because it is backed by universities and philanthropies.
Yes.
And your initial phase of starting this up will rely on philanthropies and perhaps some other forms of funding. I don't think there are a lot of philanthropies supporting the gadget market or the fashion industry. So how are you guys making money?
I'll let you leave that one.
There's no one way that you make money from running a blog. I don't know whether any of you know Darren Rouse. He runs a blog called Pro Blogger. He's run it now for 10 years. He started a blog about blogging, who knew? And he was well ahead of the curve, in 2004. And he has an annual event called PB Event. And I was listening to him speak one day because somebody said, how on earth do you make money from this? And he said, you need to think of yourself as a brand that has products. We're not one-dimensional. We're usually good at a couple of different things. So while the blog will be the nucleus, what can you offer your readers on top of that? Can you write an ebook? Can you do public speaking? Can you take a seminar? Can you do webinars? Can you start small groups where you actually have catch-ups? Do you actually have a product related to your business that you can sell your readers, or integrate some way of doing that? And that was really just like a light bulb going on for me. So that concept, aside from traditional advertising, which is just slowly sort of dripping away, like the traditional banner ad that you might see on the right-hand column of a blog, I still make money through sponsored posts and through that kind of thing. But largely now I've written an ebook, public speaking, educating, seminars, teaching. So it all swirls around the blog in the middle, but there's no single one way. And that's the entrepreneurial part of it. You've got to find those ways, those pathways.
Just briefly, do you employ others, or are you a...
No, it's just me.
And do you pay contributors?
I don't have any.
Right, okay. In your situation, Tim, how are you going in the money-making department?
Very well. I guess we're kind of old school in a way in that we don't really think there's a need for another technology conference or anything like that. We don't really want to write an ebook. Just banners are doing pretty well for us at the moment.
By banners you mean advertising?
Yeah. So we embraced programmatic advertising a long time ago. And
Sorry, programmatic.
So, okay. It used to be that you would talk to an agency or a company and you would, sort of put some ink on a paper or get this many impressions. Now there's, in real time, each time you see an ad on the internet, there's a lot of companies that know a certain bit about you and go, I'm willing to pay this much to put that banner there. So we're doing a lot of our percentage of impressions through systems like that, and it's heating up, and so I guess we're lucky in that our CPMs are growing year on year, and a lot of people are having problems with the banners that they've got access to.
Sorry, I should know what CPMs are, but...
Sorry, it's industry jargon. Cost per 1,000 impressions.
Thank you.
And we've got growing e-commerce revenues, so starting to put sales and stuff, flash deals and discounts. Like they're selling quite a few educational training packages for Photoshop and software and stuff like that.
And are your advertisers liking the fact that you're global? Is that really important to them?
Actually, yes. One of our direct advertisers at the moment is a smoker company. So they make digital meat smokers, which are absolutely awesome for slow cooking stuff. And they're...
So they don't need to be in a plain package as smokers. Because you're not talking about cigarettes.
No, thank you for clarifying that. So yeah, they're a small company in Canada doing quite well, and they don't want to target one particular market. They just want to grow their sales everywhere, and that's why they came to us, and they're having good success with it. So, but there's other companies that have, for no reason have, their Australian arm won't want to buy advertising with us, but the people at headquarters might really like the site. So
yeah, I've had that. Yeah, too. I think you've got to know your industry though. So it really, both of our examples demonstrate that there's no one way to make the money, and it really depends on your industry and who your focus is. So for me in fashion, people work in a really different way than people that are selling advertising for, say, the tech industry.
Does your model allow for advertising? I suspect it doesn't, does it?
Not in its early stage, because after a lot of I spent a lot of time with people who understand the capital markets, etc., and their conclusion was this market is not big enough to sustain this initially, at least. Who knows what a future iteration might look like? But see, I had in mind things like Bloomberg Law, which is an offshoot of Bloomberg Financial Services. The United States, as with a lot of things, when you compare Australia with the United States, has the critical mass to sustain commercial operations which do this. There's a wonderful thing called SCOTUS blog, which is a very fine expert blog that looks at the activities of the US Supreme Court. And it's grown in the time I've been following it. It started off, I think, with what you might call the commitment and geek energy of people who wanted to follow the court, etc. But Bloomberg bought it because it's got such a fine reputation, etc. And this is part of the story, I think, of startups. Can you correct me if I'm wrong? But what happens is a community is found and coalesces. A way to monetize at least some of that attention and activity and engagement occurs, and eventually there's a value in it, and there might be a bid for it, partly to neutralise a competitive activity and partly because there's a value in it. I'm starting off with a much more modest notion now that people have told me that they don't think in Australia this service, which they all encouraged me to persist with, has the chance of a commercial beginning. It needs a philanthropic beginning.
We'll come to questions in just a moment. So if you have a question, the ushers, I think, will appear on either side in just a sec. So think quickly about a question you'd like to ask. We'll come to them in just a moment. As a one-person operator here with this blog, Phoebe, where does the journalism sit in this? Because you would have had the journalism lectures where you would have been told about the sanctity of being true to the journalistic cause. But then when you're trying to make money as well, and you're a one-person operator, I would imagine that from time to time those two ideals are in conflict.
Yeah, because you're everything. You're the every person. Most journalists don't have to worry about advertising or any sort of conflict because there's an advertising department and an editor and a publisher that all sit in front of them and deal with that kind of thing. And if you run your own blog, you don't have that. So you have to very clearly explain that to your readers. If there's ever sponsored content, it's absolutely mentioned. I've got a category on the blog. And I mean, I don't have that much, but I'm very clear when that happens. If I've written an opinion piece, it's very clearly labelled as opinion. And I think because there's a conversational style in blogging that my readers understand what hat I'm wearing. It must sound very complex and confusing, but I think that if you're a good writer and you can communicate clearly, your readers are really going to understand that.
Do you feel the compromise from time to time, Tim, as a, in this realm of trying to be true to the ideas of journalism while reviewing a product from somebody who may or may not be an advertiser?
I'm constantly amazed at what people think we'll do for $100, but it's not an issue for us. We just say no thanks, or in most cases just ignore the email. So
Yeah, the same. You just say no.
What do they want you to do for $100?
Undisclosed advertorial, putting links that to their sites for small amounts of money, which will get us banned from Google and all sorts of.
What if they gave you
idiocy.
150? Would you do it then?
$1 billion.
Yes? No? Let's do a deal. Are there any questions? Anyone like to... Yes, there's one here.
Yeah, well, this is relevant to what you were just saying. In the Sydney Herald, I think it was yesterday, there was like a half a page editorial news story, allegedly, on a new blog by Michael Clark's wife. I can't think of her name. She's on Dancing with
Kylie.
the Stars. Yeah. Did you see the article? Maybe it was in the Age as well, but I wondered it was a blog about how to live a healthy lifestyle, and it was great detail on, have a shower after you exercise and all these amazing tips.
Thank God for Kylie
And I can't
Clark.
fathom how that story got placed in the Sydney Herald, and I wondered if you can't get an interview with the Herald Sun, so how
I'd
did
say
she
that
get that coverage?
She'd have a great publicist. I think Michael Clark's got excellent representation in Sydney, so I would say that his and her management have contacted the journalist, or even by the sounds of things much higher up the chain, and suggested the story. He has incredible pulling power, Michael Clark. His wife is becoming more and more of a celebrity. Newspapers need stories like that to actually move them from the newsstand, into people's hands. So I would say that more and more of what you see has come straight from the mouth of a publicist or PR in regards to celebrities and sports people.
Mind you, having a shower after exercise is a good idea.
That's what I've been doing wrong.
Yes, there's one up here.
Hi there. My question is, do you think, given that journalists are, I guess, reducing in numbers and anyone can blog, do you think that there's a credibility issue? Not that I'm suggesting journalism is perfect by any means, but at least with old school media, there's some sort of intention to be objective, and with the blogger there isn't. Deliberately there isn't. Is there a credibility issue, and I guess are we, as an audience, losing something if we're losing traditional journalists?
Can I suggest, Paul, you have a go at that one?
I think in the end, and this is partly what's so wonderful about the times we're in, the credibility issue is sorted out by the audience. It's true that over many, many years journalism developed important disciplines of verification and other things, but there are other ways to do this as well, and we need to be open to them. For those who are interested, there's a very fine study put out by the Columbia Journalism Review in the US called, I think, and I'll be corrected by learned members of the audience who I can see here, something like Post-Industrial Journalism, Emily Bell and others who co-authored it. There is many ways to communicate. The journalism we think of as institutional now grew up in that really vibrant, disaggregated time of the early printing press. So I don't think so, and I think that the audience will sort it out. What the existing brands need to remember is that the reason they're brands, the good ones, is that they've set themselves certain standards and tried to adhere to them. And where they've failed them, they need to own up to that, etc. There are lessons around us in recent history where brands suffer greatly if they don't meet the standards that they say they'll meet, or if they do wrong and they're discovered to have done it. So I feel very confident that the smallest, newest voices will be sorted out, and the standards they set for themselves will be sorted out by the audience. I also think it's wonderful that the audience can talk to each other so effectively. I was trained in a journalism culture years ago where the audience could try to talk back to the great big megaphone, but if it didn't want to listen or run their letter to the editor, they were absolutely mostly silenced. And that's different now, and that's good.
And the audience is much more savvy, isn't it, about these different kinds of journalism happening, the hybrid forms, the many different forms of advertorial that are occurring now, you know, where there is disclosure and where there isn't, where there's product placement. The audience gets it almost intuitively. Do you find that?
We still get accused from time to time of being on someone's payroll. The US military has come up before, which is absolutely not the case. But yeah, for the most part, I think you're right. People are switched on, and if you get it wrong, you'll hear about it from your audience.
Are there any other questions? Yes, there's one here in the middle.
Hi, Phoebe, you mentioned earlier that there was you described your site as being hyperlocal yet global, and Gizmag made a conscious decision to go international, and part of that was dropping the .au from the end of the address. I was wondering if you could talk about the trade-offs between covering like Australia or Melbourne, then deciding consciously to go international, and the impact that has on advertising.
So I didn't make the choice to go international. I found as almost like people came to me. It became like a travel guide or a city guide, you know. It wasn't conscious that I thought, I've got to find an audience in Malaysia or wherever it was. Because I was writing well, if I do say so myself, about the city, people started to pick it up. So that audience found me, if you like. I had to keep them though. So then I had to make sure I wasn't writing in such a way that used a lot of slang or a lot of colloquialisms or jargon, or talking about things in a way that if you weren't from Brunswick or St Kilda, you wouldn't get it. I cottoned on to that early on through a few really hilarious sort of blog posts that people from overseas read and just could not understand, you know. What do you mean, seagulls of St Kilda? I thought seagulls was a bird. Should I go? Is this a bird shop? I'm coming to Melbourne. Please explain. I mean, I was talking about a fashion shop, you know. But so you can't be too literal like that. There wasn't a decision for me to take it global. It went there, but then I saw it as my job as the editor to make sure that I kept that readership. Does that answer the question?
Do you have to internationalise what you write?
We use US English.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I don't like it, but it's difficult because you can, and especially for people in countries where they learn US English, you might say things that don't make sense, or they will correct you because you haven't spelt colour the correct way.
I imagine the Supreme Court bench wouldn't take well to Americanised English. They're still working with Latin, aren't they?
I think, actually, you'd be surprised. The sort of the plain English movement in law is long-standing. What I have noticed, and I hope developments like the ones I have in mind will accelerate this, is that there's a terrific cross-pollination in law, not just in the common law countries that share a certain legal tradition, but more broadly, especially in human rights law, but not only in human rights law, where because of the magic of digital technologies and the ability to translate more readily and more quickly, people who are engaged with some of these principles of law that apply across all jurisdictions are able to see how different cultures' legal systems are doing it. That's another plus. The internationalisation of these things is terrific, but as Phoebe says, you've got to watch out for the sort of local jargon because it can be genuinely very puzzling.
Also, remember that the internet is international. You're on the World Wide Web. So people are, it's the whole world is out. That's your audience. So while I started Lady Melbourne, which was about Melbourne, it was on the internet. So you never know where people are going to or from where people will find what you're doing. Where's
your most remote reader come from?
I have had somebody from Rwanda. Yesterday I was actually looking at my traffic and I had Ukraine, of all places. There's some people reading from the Ukraine. Most of my traffic is Australia, then the US, UK, and then usually Malaysia and Singapore fight it out for about, I don't know, 4th spot. I'm never really entirely sure why those countries, what appeals in those countries, but it does. And then, you get the really random, like Rwanda or Ukraine. Well, Ukraine's not obscure, but Saudi Arabia, that always amazes me.
Give fashion advice for Saudi Arabia.
Oh, don't eat. I mean, it is just amazing, the industry there. There was a thing on the ABC. Did you guys see it about? They called them hipster hijabis. Hijabi hipsters. It's a sweeping across, and they just had a massive conference for Islamic fashion bloggers in Dubai.
Another question? Yes, here.
We heard earlier about how you deal with issues of standards. I'm interested in whether you get complaints about breaches or other issues from your readers and how you might deal with those to pick up the accountability side of the ethics.
I don't. Maybe you guys want to... I just don't really... I write about fashion. It's not that controversial. It's not political. I'm not offensive. I don't swear. I'm very clear. I'm very open. If anything is editorialised or sponsored, I don't have to deal with that. But Tim?
Aside from the odd spelling mistake and factual error, we don't really have many problems, so factual error is not very common to clarify.
But we have in our midst somebody who's had to deal with a lot of complaints and has had to think about how to regulate dealing with complaints, because of course that was part of your job, in a sense, at the ABC, was the architect of the editorial policies. I mean, startups, are they accountable? Do they need to be more accountable? Have you thought this through?
No, I haven't, in relation to startups like Phoebe and Tim are representing here. As I say, one of the benefits of this, of the immediacy and the informality, if you like, of what's occurring, compared to, say, the big institutional structures that, on the one hand I was dealing with it when I was at the ABC, responsible for that, or when I was part of the committee that revised the Journalists Association Code of Ethics and Structures for Self-Regulation. They're quite different to this, and I trust the audience a lot. I think the audience they will withdraw.
Oh, you'll lose. Yeah, if people think you're being fake, you've paid, clearly you've taken money for something, they'll just leave, and you can see it in your analytics. They'll just, for whatever reason, if you are just not producing top-notch content or that, and that kind of thing, they will walk to the next blog or the next website because they can.
Sorry, Phoebe. They also tell on each other, and that's okay. Journalism does that too, or it ought to, because institutional journalism wields power. The most, I think, well-known example of recent years is the way The Guardian persisted in covering the phone hacking story in the UK. In Australia, Media Watch has done a lot of work to scrutinise other media outlets. That sort of process is important. It's like journalism about journalism, and I'm sure that happens in all sorts of other environments as well.
Do you dish out dirt on other fashion blogs,
No,
Phoebe?
that's not my job. But you know what keeps people accountable? Twitter. Twitter keeps people accountable and honest, because nobody wants a social media scandal, do they, really?
If you're lucky enough to be noticed in the first place, that could be a problem, yeah.
But you'll notice if you see celebrities or a brand that might have said something a little bit wrong, they'll generally just get howled down on Twitter, and Twitter is your feedback. That's the public sphere. Now, sometimes it can behave a little bit like a sewer. It can be an unpleasant place to exist. But if you treat it with respect and your readers with respect, you can get incredible feedback. And I'm absolutely accountable because there's no editor. They don't get funneled through to info, feedback at Lady Melbourne. You hear it as the editor.
All right, well, I'm going to try something. This question without notice for both of you to wrap up. Paul's been sitting here. He's about to launch a new venture. What advice can you give him? Where should he go from here to make his venture a success?
Remain friends with your funders.
Yeah, and remain friends with your developers.
Another one.
You will have to put in hours and don't let the resistance to change your mind about what you're doing, because people will come. Their minds will be changed. They will. Sometimes it just takes 7.5 years. But if you want this to happen, you'll be up there till midnight, 2 a.m, creating the content, talking to your developers, making it happen. And I think if you can demonstrate to people you're really serious about this, even though you're dealing with a very traditional institution, I think eventually they'll come on board. Hopefully not in 7.5 years.
You'd back that, Tim?
Absolutely.
And Paul, what have you learned from this?
Oh, look, I'd say thanks for that first, because it's really terrific hearing from people who've done these things. What it brings back to my mind at this stage is a remark attributed to different Australian politicians, so I'm not going to name any one of them from a previous generation. I hear people sometimes mutter this. They say that this politician once said that you know that people have just started listening to your ideas when you yourself are terribly tired of explaining them. And I thought that's very wise from someone who was involved in retail politics, and it may apply to other things that people have tried to do. I feel really confident about this because I don't feel any personal ownership of it, Andrew. I hope that what I'm doing is placing an idea, and that's why I thank the organisers, in the minds of lots of people. I've seen bits of it being done. I'm hoping that the relevant funders, and they exist, there are law foundations and funding bodies, the courts are tentatively trying it in different places. I hope it all comes together. And as I said, this is an attempt by a hybrid creature of journalism and law to say something of relevance in this transition era.
Well, Paul, Chadwick, I wish you all the very best with Law Media. I hope it goes well and it's a great success. Phoebe, Montague, thank you very much for your contribution today, and Tim, thank you very much as well. Please join me in thanking our panel.